The anti-paladin of immersion returns to talk about dwarves. That's right, short fuckers. You're not getting off the hook. Not this time. It's been a long time. We've talked about Kinder. We've talked about Warforged. We've talked about gnomes. We've talked about halflings. That's right, Bilbo. But today, we're going to talk about dwarves. That's right. Get ready to hit the dislike button because I'm going to talk about dwarves. But before I do, let me give a requested bit of information out. RPG news. My man, DM Johnny, your Dungeon Master, whatever you want to call him, had asked me, and I've been gone for like 2 months. Like when he asked me, I had just left, so belated, I suppose. But he'd asked me to just tell everybody that he'd close his channel up, and I've been badgered him, trying to get him to come back and put his stuff back together. But basically, just say, I guess that he enjoyed doing it and appreciate all the love everybody was showing him, and the fact that people were concerned and cared, and that he actually did appreciate that. But he didn't really have a way to express that, so he asked me to express that for him, just to say thank you to everyone. It was gave a fuck about him, I guess. Basically, is really the sheet way to put that. So thank you from him, and thank you from me for doing that, because he's a good dude. So that aside, we're going to talk about dwarves. Now, dwarves are one of my absolute least favorite of the races. I don't play dwarves, period. I mean, I'll use them as NPCs and do some things with them as NPCs that I think are interesting. But as player characters, absolutely not. For some reason, it has developed over the years that dwarves have become Scottish. I don't know why this is. You go into a game, you will very often find dwarves with Scottish last names. And damned if they don't all sound like a bad Sean Connery accent. That's for some reason become dwarves. I don't know. Dwarves are not part of Scottish mythology. They are Norse. So, if anything, they probably sound more like Hammered, I guess. I mean, he's not technically Norse, but he kind of sounds that way, doesn't he? That's very odd to me that the dwarves have become claimed by Scotland. I'm not sure why that is, but it is something I've found in loads of game groups that are completely unconnected. Particularly now that I'm on Skype and on YouTube and just deal with people all over the world, I'm seeing stuff like that at levels that are a bit confusing to me. So I don't know why dwarves are portrayed like that, but they do seem to have become portrayed as Scottish. One thing that I see when I look at dwarves is, well, let's back up and talk about humans for a second. Humans, and particularly in Dungeons and Dragons, the way they tried to give humans a bonus, give humans a push, which is a good thing. I think that's a very good idea. And you've seen it since adapted by other games, like you see it in a lot of the fantasy versions of Savage Worlds games. So humans are more adaptable than the other species. They have a larger realm of possibilities. They learn quickly. They are less defined. They're not as tight. Humans are broader than pretty much any of the other species, which means the other species are tighter. It means they have less range. They have less difference. They're more similar than we as humans are, which is a good way to write species because it makes them a lot easier to roleplay. If a species is more diverse, broader than the possibilities of what humans have, that's kind of difficult really to wrap your mind around. So just from being able to portray things well standpoint, having things tighter, it really works out a lot better. So with dwarves, I think of all the base species, dwarves are the tightest. There's less possibility, less difference in a dwarf. The dwarfs kind of look at the world like this, and they're continually looking backwards. My father, grandfather, and grandfather's father did this. It's good enough for them. It's good enough for me. So dwarves are very different from gnomes in the fact that gnomes are very future-looking. They are looking to what is coming. Dwarves are looking back at the lineage, at the tradition, at the heraldry, at the lore, renown, the names of their fathers, and these things mean a lot to dwarves. That history, that passion, the place they live, to dwell. They're extremely a conservative people, and the extreme, and they take a tremendous amount of pride in what has come before, what has been done before, and the tried and true methods of the past. They greatly enjoy those, but they're not innovative. And I think if you have a world that starts advancing into like an industrial age, I think dwarves are definitely left behind. They don't have the type of skills in a modern world that would be particularly useful. They make great craftsmen, and I think dwarfs, kind of like a Neanderthal, could concentrate a tremendous amount. Dwarves would make great assembly line workers. They could just keep doing the same monotonous task over and over and over again, and it really wouldn't bother them the same way it would a person. It would just drive a person to unbelievable fits of boredom. Or a dwarf would just put it together and have pride in their work. Dwarves take tremendous pride in their work. That's something that you should always put across when you're playing a dwarf. All too often people that play dwarves forget about the fact that dwarves are master craftsmen. It means typically any dwarf character you have in a role-playing game should have some amount of craft skill. Yeah, that's right. Even if you're like, well, that doesn't fit my min-maxing power gaming concept. No, son. You need to have some dots of mason or some grades in blacksmithing or gem cutting or something like that, because you're going to have picked those things up. Whatever your clan particularly specializes in, you are going to have some ability in that. You can't help but learn it. It's like growing up on a farm and be like, no, I'm not going to learn farming. Yes, you did. You don't have a choice. You got put out there and learn stuff. You know, concept of, well, we just fought. No. Dwarves are craftsmen. They're all craftsmen. They all have one type or another, and there's different crafts, like I said, that you could do anything from working stone to working gold or silver, working with gems, or a lot of types of armor or weaponry, shields, things like that. I mean, those are all very valued traditions for dwarves. I would say even, probably even a lot of dwarven weavers, because you got to make talbards, you got to make flags, you have to make heraldic banners. Those things are important to dwarves, so that wouldn't be, I think, something that's just looked down upon by dwarves. They would, well, that's an honorable profession. Like if you have true craftsman skill, I don't think it really matters to a dwarf that much where it manifests, as long as you can bring it across. And if it's something a bit unconventional and traditional, the fact where they'd be like, oh, you shouldn't do that, that's not good. Like, well, look how well I do it. And they admire that level of skill, that level of artistic craftsmanship. So when you're creating a dwarf, always think about some crafts. You should have at least, maybe like in a D&D game, 1 or 2 ranks, maybe in multiple crafts. It's like, well, yeah, my character didn't know how to ride a horse because I live in caves, but I do know a little bit about knowledge of praise, and I know a little bit about heraldry and history and about crafts. That's another one. Dwarves players, I should sleep all the time on that. Dwarves know history. Definitely. They definitely know their history. That means you have ranks in knowledge history. Dwarves have that. That is incredibly, incredibly important to dwarves. They're backwards looking. They're conservative. They're traditional. That means they know what has happened before. They're not like, I look backwards and I see nothing. I don't know nothing or remember nothing. A dwarf could probably recite 15 generations on his father's side all the way back. Easily. Knowing their names, knowing their deeds. That's knowledge history. Knowing about the heraldry, the legacy, their people, the great battles that were fought against the goblin and orc hordes, against the kobold invaders from deep down nebulous recesses that spilled up in tremendous form, fashion, and legacy. Now, when you bring those ideas together, the dwarf, he uses that axe, he uses that hammer, because that is tradition. That's what's always been done. That's what always will be done. Now, there's going to be some variety. I think the idea of a dwarven battle rager was a pretty fresh, original concept. I want to say that it was R.A. Salvatore originally brought that up in one of his books. I think that's where it came from. I might be wrong. But that came out somewhere around the middle era of 2nd edition, I believe. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty deep take on a dwarf. And I think that you could definitely have some diversity. I'm not saying every dwarf is 2 active chainmail stone brains. No. There's some diversity there. There's some difference. There's some ways you can make a character one way or another. However, at their core, they are going to be certain things. They are rigid, inflexible people. They are insular and intolerant. They dislike a lot of things. They tend to generally be rather grumpy, but they cherish that which proves itself to be. To become a dwarf's ally or friend, you have to prove, first of all, that you're worthy, that you have something that you bring to the table, not some lazy layabout that means nothing. They're not going to respect that. You have to bring an area which you demonstrate positive excellence in, first of all, to win their respect. They're not going to be your friend if they don't respect you. The dwarfs aren't a species of pity. There's very little pity in a dwarf. Dwarfs are more apt to just be disgusted by something that, say, a human might pity, and they themselves are going to find that really kind of loathsome and not something that they're going to appreciate. They're going to respect that which is excellent, which is strong, which is brilliant, and that's when you could start having those interspecies friendships, relationships. When the dwarf begins to respect you, that's the foundation that's formed them for dwarfs. It has to be about respect. So once you earn that respect, and it's slow, it should be a very slow process. It's not like 3 game sessions and the dwarf's your best friend. No. I mean, you got to remember, dwarfs live for a long time, so they have a long view. And again, they do tend to view things backward, but often that makes them even more suspicious because they're like, oh, we remember when the humans screwed us over here. Oh, we remember what the elves did to us. We remember what those goblins did to us. Yes, we definitely remember. They don't just forget and forgive. They remember and they hold grudges. Dwarves are very grudge-holding people. They're very lawful and orderly societies where I would imagine everybody has to fit in where they get in, and everyone has to produce, everyone has to work. You don't work, you don't eat. That's where the society with dwarves. You need to contribute at all times. However, I think the elderly would be well taken care of by dwarves. They would be seen for the knowledge that they possess, because dwarves are not innovative. Innovation is the currency of the young, but dwarves don't care about that. They care about tradition. They care about the wisdom of the old. I mean, there's two completely different ideals there, where the young are bucking system, trying to make revolution, trying to make change, trying to bring innovation and idea, both socially and technologically. But the dwarves aren't interested in that. Dwarves are trying to make the same iron weapons, the same steel breastplates that they have made for countless generations. They're not interested in the latest and the greatest. What is passed down from their great-grandfather is far more important to them, far more interesting to them. So when you're playing a dwarf, invest them with various aspects. And it doesn't have to be like line by line what I'm saying. This is sort of a template for getting to the core of the psychology, of the sociology, and how that interweaves with the genetics of a dwarf. You got to remember, like a fantasy game, you have a component that's your essence, your soul, what that creating divinity that made your species, what they put inside you to make you a certain way. And then that manifests and interacts with your genetics, and in some ways takes the place of genetics, but it's put out a blueprint to be a certain way. So your character will be a certain way, regardless of what that way is, or how much scope we have to interpret that way. It's still a certain way. You are a dwarf. Again, you're not an elf. I talked about this in a video I did about playing against type. There's only so far you can go when playing against type until you are no longer playing that, because remember, a divinity has preordained what you are. There are limits and scopes. It's like a piece of computer software. It is programmed to be able to do certain things. It cannot do other things. It just can't. You can't load up your latest video game and do mathematical calculations on it, because it just doesn't do that. That's just not what it does. It just does other things. So when you're interpreting a dwarf, when you're playing a dwarf, and you bring across those aspects, when you bring across their love of alcohol, yet their tremendous resistance because they have a strong tolerance for poison. They're old racists. So the dwarves are very racist. Probably of all the races of D&D, probably the most racist, or most species, depending on how you want to interpret those words. And they're going to have a lot of problems with that half-orc. They might have a lot of problems with that elf. They might have problems with a gnome. Who knows what dwarves have, because they hold grudges. Oh, well, my great-great-uncle on my mother's side, he got done dirty by a gnome one time 10,000 years ago. You're like, so? Oh, no, you think I've forgotten? Well, I don't know what that has to do with me. I'm just over here trying to have... No, I see. And they have always known. So, it's definitely, you can play a dwarf. Dwarfs make, if you want to play a character who has always known, who all has a chip on his shoulder, who's curmudgeon. Dwarfs make great mudgeons, and they can really come across with that resentment, with that I've been done wrong, I've been put down. And for me, when I interpret dwarfs and I'm running a game, I really like to give dwarfs some kind of cause, something that's been put upon them, and how do they struggle with it? How do they deal with that humiliation, with that desecration of their tradition? I think that provides an extremely interesting element, and that's what I've run in campaigns with using dwarves and had players really react well, positively. Oh, that's really interesting. Seeing the dwarves, their culture kind of collapse from both inside and outside, internal and external forces that change and shape that, and how they desperately attempt to cling to what they're trying to look back at. And seeing backwards, it's so great because that everything wasn't destroyed then. Now, currently in the present time, things are so bad. Well, they have to go, instead of changing it by going a new direction, they have to try to figure their way back out to that old path. That's what they're looking at. At the core. They are traditionalists, and I think that is a very difficult idea to take from a dwarf. Even if you're like a battle rager and you're like, I do this and that, at the core, right? It doesn't mean right at the surface, but at the core, there is still a traditionalist inside that battle rager. There's still those aspects of the old world life of dwarven type that is going to resonate with them, and it can resonate in different ways. That's the kind of thing I want to get across. Now that you have to play a character like this, you have to put the correct soul into the body that you're trying to manipulate. You can do a lot of things with the body, but the soul's got to be the same. The mind can be different, but the soul's got to be the same. And you got to figure out what it is. And if the character is a certain way, well, where's the room in there for interpretation? And I think that's really the sweet spot when you find what the room is for interpretation and making an interesting, different, unique character that is still believable to that. Because anybody could, I could make a dwarf that was different than other dwarves because he's just so ridiculously off in left field, that no one would possibly believe he was a dwarf. And that's not really a challenge. That's the easiest thing to possibly do. And sometimes you'll see that. Occasionally I've seen a few characters and stories that were written that were like, come on, dude, really? No, I don't think so. But when you're making a dwarf, that's the number one thing you want to look at is how are they traditionalists? How do they apply to this craft? How do they look at the excellence? How do they judge and evaluate others? Judge dwarves is extraordinarily judgmental, more so even than like an elf. And how are they judging you? They're looking at you and going, okay, well, yeah, you might be good at swinging a sword, but what can you do with that back over there? How can you farm? I see you're a farmer, but you suck at farming. I can tell that right now because your crops are dying. I'm over here digging in the ground, and I can make comparisons because I know these crops during planting season should not be dead. The harvest should actually bring out food. I understand that. So, it's interesting. And then you can also look into like the foodstuffs that dwarves have. I think that's always interesting. What are they eating? Big lizards, giant beetles, rats. What are they farming down there? Because it ain't cows. You can talk about the kinds of funguses that they grow and like pastas and so forth that they make out of them, making an interesting, different kind of culinary idea. And that, again, going to make for surface food might seem weird. You're like, oh, it's a steak. Oh, no. What about some rat meat, son? So I'm trying to get with. So that's what I'm going to talk about with dwarves here. Let me know what you think about dwarves, how you like to play dwarves. Dwarves are your favorite race. I know a lot of people love dwarves. I don't play them. Like, they're just like right out the bat. Dwarves, gnomes, halflings, gone. I will not play them. I play people play them in my games. That's fine. I'm not like, oh, you can't play that. That's fine. But for me, they're just very bland, very dry, very similar, and they don't really have the dynamic spark that I really like to see in characters. Everything is very, very slow. Every slow rumination of thought, slow of action, and they don't really jive in any aspect of my playing style. But let me know what you guys think about dwarves and